Welcome to the LifeBeat Podcast, a One Joshua Group production, providing access to information and experts to improve quality of life and health outcomes.
Hi, I'm Kermit Payne, your host for LifeBeat. Thank you for joining us. We have as our guest today Dr. Leanne Woods-Burnham. She's assistant professor in the Department of Surgery at Morehouse School of Medicine. She is self-described and acknowledged as a translational scientist. And Dr. Woods-Burnham is going to tell us more about that later. She has a number of accolades, very well deserved. She and her team are involved in evaluating molecular drivers of aggressive tumor behavior. And she's the expert in that, and she'll talk more about that. She's also involved in the national stage in research and community partnerships, talking about genetics, ancestry, DNA, and those things that are important. Again, she'll share with us why those things are so important. She's also recognized for increasing the visibility of talented Black scientists, something very critical. That's a new replacement for STEAM and STEM. And she's been described as a remarkable individual who is engaged in breaking down barriers to improve better cancer care. And congratulations, Dr. Woods-Burnham, on your most recent accolade and acknowledgement as the Innovator of the Year in Men's Health by the Atlanta Business Journal. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Well, now I want to start to be sure that I mention all the important things to you that we found in our research, but there may be some things that you want to share with us that are important to you, and we get a chance to allow you to do that first.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm most proud of my team that I am blessed every day to lead at Morehouse School of Medicine. As you mentioned, we're a medical school, a graduate school, so there's a lot of students and trainees and faculty members who are really committed to advancing health equity, in particular in the Atlanta area and the Georgia area. And so I'm new to Atlanta. I've only been here 3 years. I came from California before this, but part of what really drove my decision was because of what was going on to advance health equity in Atlanta and how much it was needed. And it's been a joy to really watch the transformation in real time in a lot of different areas currently.
We thank you for moving from the West Coast to the East Coast. So I guess we could just call you an official East Coast transplant now. So
Yes.
Thank you for coming, and we greatly appreciate all the good work that's done at Morehouse School of Medicine. Morehouse School of Medicine is a friend for One Joshua Group and vice versa, and we certainly appreciate that partnership. And now to the real nitty-gritty.
Yes.
Your work revolves around prostate cancer. I am a prostate cancer survivor, so you can imagine I am particularly interested in learning more about that.
Yeah.
Now, what we know is that prostate cancer is more aggressive in Black men, least screened in Black men, later diagnosed in Black men, which means that the health outcomes are probably worse in Black men. Dr. Woods-Burnham, where do we start the conversation to change that?
Oh, so I have to rewind back to when I was a student and my dad called me at the time. He is a Black man. He was 50 years old at the time. And he called, I was walking out of class, and he said he had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I was a pre-med student at the time. I didn't even really know what a prostate was. And so I said, well, first of all, what's a prostate? Second of all, how did he get this? Because in my eyes, he was young. He does everything right. He never went to the doctor because he was just never had any symptoms of anything. And on that journey, that's where I learned that he wasn't alone. There was a lot of Black men at our church. There was a lot of Black men in our community who were being diagnosed with prostate cancer in their 40s and 50s. And then as I started to do work in the lab and then be in the clinic, I noticed very quickly that the disease looked different in Black patients versus white patients. The age they were presenting to in the clinic, how aggressive their disease was. And so then I had to say, well, why? And there were so many different reasons. And I said, man, this is going to be really difficult because there's reasons with screening guidelines. There's reasons at the provider level. There's reasons at the institutional level. There's biological reasons. There's access reasons, all these reasons. And I said, I want to be involved in these reasons, but I'm not going to be able to do that unless I get this degree. Mm-hmm. So I carried all these ideas in my head, and I knew once I get the degree, I can sit at the tables. And that's exactly what happened. And so as a translational scientist, I am a scientist, so I'm at the bench, is what we call it, in the lab, leading teams that do the actual experiments. But I also design clinical trials to make sure that Black men have access to what are the best cutting edge treatments out there. I'm very intentional about designing those types of trials and implementing them. Whether we're talking about screening guidelines and educating providers, or whether we're talking about raising awareness in the community, all of those things I get to be a part of. And as you can imagine, that it's a lot of work, so it takes a lot of people. So I'm very blessed to have different groups of people that are working in all of these different areas to sort of keep the ball rolling in the right direction.
So you mentioned a perspective and an attitude. You don't catch cancer.
Yeah.
But you talked about the biological implications of cancer.
Yes.
Tell us about the biology of cancer.
Yes. So what we know, a lot of cancers have a heritable reason. A lot of cancers, if your mom or your dad or your brothers and sisters have had certain types of cancers, it can raise your likelihood of having certain types of cancers, and prostate cancer is one of those. Biologically, when we look at Black men in the United States, what we know for sure is there are genetic links to West Africans who have prostate cancer. And so this is not a surprise, especially to Black folk, because we know that people who came through the transatlantic slave trade came from West Africa. So sometimes I'm in scientific meetings and I'll hear other scientists who maybe are not familiar with the history of the U.S. I don't know how that's possible, but I guess it does exist, where they'll say, well, we need to consider African genetics if we're looking at prostate cancer as a whole. And so those of us who work on prostate cancer in Black men in the U.S., what we're quick to point out is that is very interesting if you're talking about global health, but we're really interested in the DNA in the West African part of the continent because that is what was passed on to Black Americans who are living today. And so it's probably not a surprise that some of the worst rates that we see in prostate cancer are in men in West Africa. And then we see, similar rates here. So I like to tell people, especially when I was living in California, as you can imagine, people out there just have no excuse to not have a healthy lifestyle, right? The weather's always great. You can always exercise. There's green juice on every corner. And so a lot of times men would say, well, I do everything right. I'm very, very healthy. I'm not really concerned about my chance of getting prostate cancer. And I say, well, you can eat grass and take wheatgrass shots every day and do all these things. But at the end of the day, you can't change your DNA. And so all it takes is one mutation on one gene to have all of your good efforts that you're doing to go awry. So it's still important to advocate for yourself and know your family history, because even if you do everything right, there still is a genetic component that not living right doesn't always override.
It's interesting when we're talking about the inheritability, the DNA, the family history, what we don't know and what we don't talk about. When we begin to examine how we can inherit a cancer gene, do we have enough information to study that in West Africans and our relationship here in the United States, whatever that mechanism is? And you mentioned genes and molecular and molecules and biology. So where we go to get that information, do we have adequate pools of information to examine that ancestry?
So that's like an hour-long conversation by itself. We don't have enough. Okay, so let me just start by saying that we do know with certainty, we can trace and track certain genes that we know for sure. This gene, if you have this genetic mutation, this is associated with that West African ancestry, and this will increase your likelihood of getting prostate cancer. But we don't know all of the genetic reasons. And I'll use my lab as an example. When I was a trainee, I found on accident that there's a gene called ERBB2. It encodes for a protein called HER2 that we found on accident that this gene was expressed in a high prevalence in tumors from Black men who had prostate cancer. So when we saw this, what clicked in my head was, well, the FDA has already approved certain drugs that can target this in the cancer cell. So we don't have to wait a super long time for a medication. It already exists. It's already FDA approved. So why are we at this point where we didn't know that this was more prevalent in Black men with prostate cancer? So I did this deep dive into what had happened in the science in the years leading up to that. And I saw that this gene had been looked at all the way up to clinical trials in humans. So there were clinical trials where millions of dollars are spent in treating men with prostate cancer with this drug that targeted this gene. Well, looking at those studies, I saw there weren't Black men enrolled in the trials. And the men's tumors didn't express this gene. So the drug's not going to work because the gene is not even there to target. So it's money going down the drain. It was a dead end. And so I was able to develop projects where I was able to show this gene is important in prostate cancer and it's more likely to affect Black men who have the worst outcomes. Let's resurrect this and relook at this. And so that literally catapulted my scientific career. So now I have a team that's what we do is we look at this particular gene and we look at it in human cell lines that we grow in the lab. We can use different drugs to see how the cells react. We use animal models where we have tumors from humans that are implanted into mice, and we treat the mice with the different drugs and see how that works. We're designing clinical trials, that can be implemented here in Atlanta first, because that's where I'm at. And so hopefully those are, available to the public in the near future. So that's sort of an accidental discovery, but there's not a lot of biospecimens that are available from diverse patients. And that's a whole other issue.
So is that lack of diversity in biospecimens, does that hinder our ability to be able to diagnose and treat, or identify how we can improve prostate health outcomes? For
sure. I mean, we can even look at COVID as an example when they were developing the vaccine. And, regardless of how people feel about the vaccine or not, when we looked at the steps that it took to get the vaccine approved, what everyone can agree on is that the vaccine was not able to be tested in every single type of persons who have different autoimmune disorders, right? And so when the vaccine came out, we didn't necessarily have a full picture of, well, how will this affect people who have diabetes, or how will this affect somebody who has lupus, or how will this affect, we had to just fast track it, right? So it's sort of a similar thing. If you're not able to test things and see the full picture, then you're not able to do what we call advancing precision medicine, which is the best medical approach per person. That's the goal. You just want to be able to provide each patient with what is best for that person.
So precision medicine, biospecimen repositories, and we're going to take a sidestep here because we get a teachable moment. And this is about career development, because not only do we need specimens, but we need scientists who are interested in the specimens. So what does a day look like in your lab?
Oh, goodness. It's different. It's different every single day. Today, I'll just take today, for example. So today I walked in the lab. I have one student who is processing samples from a research study of samples that we collect from different comprehensive cancer centers in the nation. And she's looking to see whether certain genes are in circulation, certain proteins rather, if they're in circulation that are linked to prostate cancer. Then I had another person where he's working in the animal facilities where he's growing the tumors and treating them with different drugs to target this particular gene of interest. Then I had a call with some oncologists and then also a biotech company where they're interested in what we're doing, and we want to see how we can gather more funding. Funding is a huge part of what we do. So how can we get more funding to continue to do what we do? Then I'm working on a manuscript, a lot of data that we've gathered in the last 2 years we need to publish so the scientific community knows. So writing, and then running over here to talk to you about this today.
So there are scientists who are involved in this, and there are other science-related jobs that are involved in learning more about precision medicine, improving health outcomes, particularly in prostate cancer, which I'm sure helps us be better in looking at other cancer-related diseases. So whereas Dr. Woods-Burnham has talked specifically about cancer and where she's talked about her lab, I hope we've heard her say that there are other employment and career opportunities that can help us address and resolve some of these issues. And to be exploratory in her translational scientific presence. I want to go back to West Africa. I understand that you spent some time in West Africa recently. Congratulations on that. What was that like?
Life-changing. So I was invited to go to Liberia to help assess the current state of prostate cancer education and screening, and looking at some exciting things in the future and some collaborative potential between what we have going on in the United States and what's going on in Liberia. Because they're a West African country, their prostate cancer rates are aggressive, how they are here. And so every day was just jam-packed, whether we were in a hospital or whether I was teaching students, which, let me tell you, to teach about West African genetics and prostate cancer in West Africa was just a whole moment, right? To be able to travel to the lab and the clinic where researchers literally protected the rest of the world during the Ebola outbreak. And the people who worked there then are still working there now. That was amazing. And then I was able to spend 15 minutes on a beach where just looking over the Atlantic Ocean and just wondering what that was like for ancestors to have been on that beach and leave that beach and never know if they were coming back or when they were coming back. When I came back to the States, I actually just saw my grandfather a few weeks ago. He's in hospice right now and battling, a few different illnesses, and he's has dementia. And so when I talk to him, he sometimes makes sense and sometimes doesn't make sense. But one thing he said to me, I showed him a picture of me in Africa. I said, "Look, I was just in Africa." And he said, "You didn't take me with you." And I said, "Oh, but he doesn't know I did bring him with me." I stood there in that moment and I was like, "Oh, all of my grandparents and the people before them, that we come from that, but didn't get a chance to go back, and certainly didn't get a chance to go back at a level of making a change and making a difference." So I said, "Granddad, I brought you with me. You don't know. You were in here."
Those are just amazing stories. And it is that lineage that you talked about, those stories that will have people like you create new discoveries that will help people like me and others. And that brings me to a question about the Hispanic and the Latino population. Are those same the variety and the abundance of those cell pools, are they available similarly in the Hispanic and the Latino
They're not
community?
available. So in science, if we want to buy cell lines, because that's what we usually have to do, you have to buy them to then have them in your lab and work on them. In prostate cancer, there is only one cell line from a Black patient at all, like one. So you can get dozens and dozens from men of European descent, but there's only one of that from an African-American patient. There's none, Hispanic and Latino. And so that's an issue. That's the number one growing population in the nation. But you could say the same thing, for Asian biospecimens. It's, to me, when I talk to scientists, one of the things I point out is to be a scientist, part of your success is to have a good experimental design. To me, the experimental design is flawed if you're not taking everything into account. I don't understand how some people sleep at night, but that's just me. So when I'm designing at the beginning of the experiment, I'm thinking, if this is a disease, who's the population at worst risk? If it's that population, then I need to have biospecimens from that population in the study. That's what makes sense to me. I have a story of I just mentioned that we have one cell line from a Black patient that's commercially available. A few years ago, there was a second cell line added. And everybody in the prostate cancer world was excited. They said, oh, now we have a second cell line from a Black patient. And so we were growing this cell line, as were many, many other labs around the world. And I noticed in the lab that I was in, and a few other labs noticed at the same time, that the cells weren't growing as the company described they should grow. So this set off some red flags. So we started to do some tests to see if the proper receptors were being expressed in the cell. And we saw, no, it's supposed to have these receptors, but it doesn't. Something's not right. And so Dr. Rick Kittles, who's the VP for research now at Morehouse School of Medicine, at the time, he was working at City of Hope in California. He was looking into this issue, and I joined his lab at that time. And so right when I joined was at the cusp of, we discovered that not only was the cell line that was being sold by a multi-billion-dollar company, not only was it not from a Black patient, but it was actually a kidney cancer cell line and not even a prostate cancer cell line. And so you have people trying to work on finding cures for cancer, and we weren't even using the right model. And so before this hit the press, we reached out to a few different labs in the country and said, listen, we're about to publish this. This is pretty major. You're working with the cell line, so we're giving you the opportunity to pull back and really sort of save yourself from embarrassment, but to do the right thing at the end of the day. I don't think anybody pulled back that we reached out to. That was a moment to me. To see people who receive funding to advance health equity, and it was clear in that moment, you're not concerned about health equity, that you are willing to continue to work on a white kidney cell line and say that you're helping Black men with prostate cancer. And so when we published it, the company was forced to pull the cell line off of its markets. It's no longer commercially available. People who were working on that cell line can't work on that cell line. Some people lost their jobs. Some people lost their careers, the whole 9 yards. But that wasn't the big picture to me. It was in that moment I realized, and I actually wrote a commentary that was published in Cell, which is one of the major scientific journals internationally. And the article was called "Not All Champions Are Allies in Health Disparities Research." That was a moment that I wish I hadn't discovered, but that's what it was.
I would tell you that I always like looking at the pictures in the Cell journal. I never understood them, but it was that color red. There was something about that was important. As I said, I didn't understand them, but they were very different pictures. The images in the Cell journal are very different than you look in the other other journals. So we've gone to West Africa, and so now we're going to come back to Georgia and talk about some community programs that you're doing in the great state of Georgia. So share some of that with us.
Yeah, so there is a team that I lead along with Dr. Rick Kittles at Morehouse School of Medicine called the Prostate Cancer Precision Prevention Program. The short word is PCP3. That's what we call it. And it's a team of almost 50 people now. A lot of volunteers, employees, students, phlebotomists, nurses, where we go out and we provide free prostate cancer screening in the form of a blood test. We measure, we quantify circulating PSA, which is the same as if you went to the doctor and said, listen, I want to be screened for prostate cancer. That's what they start with, is a blood test to measure your PSA. And so we do that out in the community, and we make sure in our follow-up that men have multiple options depending on where they live, what their insurance level is. And so that's a very meaningful thing that we work on.
So I do know that I've heard from some of your colleagues about the need to create our own biospecimen repository. So we want to encourage you and your colleagues to do that.
Thank you.
So we've enjoyed spending the last few minutes with you. And most of all, you and I talked about stories from the beginning. We want you to tell us a story in the end of this conversation so that we can leave that with our viewers who will tune into this on YouTube and our other places where they receive this information. So what would you like to leave as the end note on this conversation?
I guess I've been hanging with a student intern today, and it makes me think of my own kids I have 2 in high school, 1 in college. And so I would say to up and coming trainees and younger people in general, I hear a lot, and I'm sure you hear a lot. The younger generation, they want to be famous. Yes. And so I say, well, what do you want to be famous for, though? You have to be doing something. And I don't know. I just want to be famous. I want to be an influencer. I want all of these things. And so what I tell people is, in my field, I'm that, right? In my field, I'm that. I didn't set out to be that though, right? I set out to make a difference, and there's a whole grind behind that people don't necessarily want to commit to something to that level. But to me, it was worth it to the change that we're making now. And so my advice is to find where your passion is and just work hard at it and be kind to people, and you will make a difference. And it might put your name up there, since that's what the young people are interested in.
So thank you so very much. So you took some of my words, and I've got to figure out when I'm going to close about being kind to people. I can't say that anymore. Maybe I have to think about a different way of saying it. So having joined us today is Dr. Leanne Woods-Burnham from Morehouse School of Medicine. She is a translational scientist. She's told you that you can create a career and be famous and leave your mark in the world if you're kind to people and if you're compassionate. And most of all, what I heard her say is that you have to do that with integrity. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining LifeBeat, and be kind to each other and be kind to yourself.
We would love to hear from you. Send your listener letters, questions, and topic requests to media@the1jg.com. LifeBeat, the podcast, is sponsored by One Joshua Group, your strategic source for engagement to improve life through better health, education, and information. To learn more, visit us at the1jg.com or follow our work on social media using hashtag 1JGCollabs. One Joshua Group, advancing access to healthcare and education by joining what you know with what we've learned.